Hello, this is a story from the fairy hill of Tiveragh near Cushendall. Once there was a blacksmith who lived in a cottage with his 14-year-old son Andrew. And the blacksmith was really enjoying passing on his skills of smithing to his son. His son was called Andrew and he was a good-natured boy. He would do anything to help his neighbours and he was well liked in the whole area. And after a day in the forge, the blacksmith would take his fiddle from the hearth and he would play a few tunes. And he was passing on his fiddle skills to his son as well as his blacksmithing skills. But in time, things changed. Silence came into the house. Andrew stopped speaking and became quite withdrawn. And he no longer went to the forge to help his father. Now you might think that this is typical of a 14-year-old teenage boy, but it wasn't just the manner. His appearance began to change too. Andrew became very pale and his eyes sank into his sockets and his face began to look gaunt. And he became quite ill and took to his bed. Only for one thing didn't change, and that was that Andrew could eat. He could eat as long as the day was long. Well, the blacksmith became more and more worried about his son and feared that he might die. And he had heard that living in the village some way off, there was an old woman, a hen wife, who looked after the poultry for the house of a big grand lady. And this hen wife was said to have some knowledge and to be wise in the ways of remedies and things like that. So the blacksmith set off to see her. Now that hen wife knew he was coming, for she could put the white of an egg in a glass, and looking into that glass, she could see what was going to happen. So when the blacksmith came, she was ready for him. Now that hen wife had a heart of gold, and she said she would do whatever she could to help the blacksmith. Aye, she said, after the blacksmith had told the story, it may be that your Andrew has been replaced by a changeling. And I'll tell you what to do. And she went away out to the backyard and she came back with a big sack of eggshells. And she told the blacksmith to take the eggshells home and to put a bucket of water out at the back door and wait for the next full moon. And after the full moon had shone on the bucket of water, he was to take the eggshells one by one and fill them with water. And then he was to carry the eggshells into the bedroom of Andrew and place them on the bed. Except he had to pretend that they were really, really heavy as he carried them in. Well, the blacksmith had never heard the like of this, but he would do anything to help his son. So he took them home, he put the bucket by the door, he waited for the next full moon to come, and then he prepared to take all the eggshells in and put them on Andrew's bed. Before he started, he gave Andrew a good big bowl of broth and some wheaten bread. And as Andrew was slurping away, then the blacksmith began his work. And as the bed was filling up with eggshells, Andrew, or the creature in the bed, began to wheeze and gasp and make grunting sounds until finally this came out of his mouth. I am 700 years old, but I never saw the like of this. Well, the blacksmith went running back to the hen wife as fast as could be, told her what had happened, and she says, aye, it sounds like he's a changeling, but there's only one way to be sure, she says. Light a fire in his room, and when he's not looking, throw him into the fire, and if it's Andrew, he'll cry out for help and you can rescue him. And if it's a changeling, the changeling will rise out of the house with the smoke. Well, the blacksmith went back to the house and he did as the hen wife had said, and he chucked the creature into the fire, and didn't it rise out of the house with the smoke? And he went back to the hen wife, because in stories things happen in threes. He went back to the hen wife a third time, because the changeling was gone. But how could he get his son back? "Aye," said the hen wife, "that'll be the hardest thing to do, but I'll help you now." And she told him that he had to go to the fairy hill at Tiveragh on the eve of May, on Beltana Eve, for that was when the fairy folk had their greatest celebrations. And that was when he might have a chance of getting Andrew back. And she gave him 3 things to help. She gave him a Bible, put it under one arm. And then she took a great big rooster hen, and that went under the other arm. And then she gave him a poker for the fire, because, as I'm sure you know, the fairy folk don't like iron. And those were the 3 things that the blacksmith took away. And he waited for May Eve, and as soon as it was dark, he climbed the hill of Tiveragh. And then he saw that the side of that hill was open, and inside the wee fairy fiddlers were furiously fiddling away, and the fairies were dancing, and their feet were hardly touching the ground. And when he looked, he saw at the back of their cave, he saw his son Andrew looking fine and healthy and strong. And he had to wipe a tear from his eye, for it seemed that long since he'd seen his own son. But then he took the poker and he rammed it into the side of the hill to keep it open. And then in he walked with the Bible and the rooster under his arms. Well, the fairy folk looked up at him, and they laughed at him and jeered at him and scoffed at him. And he said, "I'm not leaving here without my son." And they laughed even harder. But then the rooster flew out from under his arm and landed on a wee fairy man's head, and there was great flapping of wings and commotion, and all the wee fairy folk went scurrying out of the way, and the blacksmith was able to walk right in and hand the Bible to Andrew. Well, as soon as he had the Bible in his hand, the wee fairy folk began to push them out of that cave, out and out and out, till they were there standing in the darkness on Tiveragh Hill. And the blacksmith, he took the poker out, and the fairy hill shut in an instant. And the blacksmith and his son walked home to their wee cottage. Now, for a year and a day after that, Andrew didn't speak. But when a year and a day was up, the blacksmith took his fiddle from the hearth one night and began to play a tune. And Andrew took his down too and began to play. And after that, he returned to his old good-mannered, good-natured self and began to work in the blacksmith's forge again. And he even taught his father some of the tunes that he had learned at his time with the fairies, because, as I'm sure you know, the fairies have the best music of all. And that's the story of Tiveragh Hill.